Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's bizarre episode takes place in the far eastern Russian province of Yakutia. This expansive province comprises 20% of the territory of the Russian Federation. Huge stretches of taiga and tundra blend together to create nearly void wilderness, which sportsmen are drawn to often. Much of the locals live very close to the land, pulling their resources from the plentiful fish and wildlife in the area. This province is dotted with hundreds of streams and rivers, as well as lakes and ponds. Scots pine, Dahurian larch, and common juniper are the common trees in the area, and common bushes include lingonberry bush and the weeping fig. The plants that cover the ground are beautiful and include martagon lily, alpine French honeysuckle, and the Arctic aster. Common animals of the area include moose, Manchurian deer, northern deer, and musk deer. The predators in the area include wolverine, polar bear, polar and brown bear, Siberian tigers, and wolves. It is in this wild and remote setting that our episode takes place. On the 24th of April, around 8 a.m., 42-year-old fisherman Igor Vorozhbitsin was arriving at his favorite fishing hole. As he packed his fishing gear the day prior, his family expressed their hesitance in him setting out so early in the year, but he wanted to take advantage of a warm snap and enjoy his favorite pastime. Before he could leave, his granddaughter snatched his phone and hid it away for a little while, playing and teasing her grandpa. She knew he would rarely let her touch it, so she craftily snatched it from him. As Igor gathered his fishing gear and departed his car toward a secret fishing location, he reflected on how he had carefully charted out the area and devised his plans for the day to the greatest detail. As he proceeded down the trail toward the river, his car faded as it grew more distant. Just as the river bottom came into view, Igor felt a tremendous force throw him forward onto his face. Gravel and mud smeared down the side of his face as he grappled to gather his senses and determine what was happening to him. It took one very powerful paw swipe to his skull just above his left eye to clarify the most horrible reality. Igor was being crushed under the weight of a gigantic brown bear, which was already clawing at his skull. He uttered a scream as his hands reached toward the bear to fend off further damage. He wiggled onto his right side in an attempt to escape the bear's enormous weight and painful attack on his head. As he rolled over, the bear swatted him on his head and chest. It then sunk its huge canines into his chest and left abdomen, biting and clawing him rapidly in a frenzied attack. It bit onto his upper left arm as well as his right wrist and hand as he tried to protect himself from the giant predator's jaws and claws. The bear bruised and trampled Igor and his fishing equipment as it positioned and then repositioned itself to best get at the terrified man. Just as the bear closed in on Igor's head once again, a mysterious sound broke over the confusion. The words, "baby, baby, oh baby," permeated the air like an audio cloud over the violence. The bear immediately spun on its heels and disappeared into the brush, even faster than it had appeared. Igor, still completely confused by the change of events, glanced around, incredulously searching for the source of the apparently terrifying melodies. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. The screen was lit up, and Justin Bieber's song "Baby" was repeating the chorus for each ring the phone sounded. As Igor recovered his senses and his adrenaline began to return to normal levels, he realized he may be seriously injured. He used his cell phone to reach out to some fishermen he knew were in his area and requested their help in returning to his car and seeking medical attention. The fishermen arrived as Igor was attempting to regain his feet. His face was bleeding and had significant gashes and bite marks. His body had several large spots of blood showing through his clothes, and he was in obvious pain. They helped him limp the short distance back to his car. As soon as Igor arrived at the hospital, the injuries on his head and face were wrapped in gauze, as was his left arm and right wrist. His abdomen and chest received bandages and were cleaned up. His left eye was swollen shut, probably from the impact of the bear driving him into the ground initially. In just a few hours, he was well on his way to full recovery. Now, this was not the only time that Justin Bieber's music had a significant impact to create an outcome. In March of the same year, students at Tenino High School in Washington State piped in Justin Bieber's music into the hallways, promising to turn it off once they reached their $500 fundraising goal. The student body obliged to put an end to their audio assault, and the fundraising goal was surpassed by the end of the first period, bringing in $915. After analyzing this odd and interesting bear attack, I'm left with a few questions. Do you think Igor would have survived had his granddaughter not changed his ringtone? Was the ringtone the only thing that drove the bear off, or was the attack the full extent of what may have been a defensive attack? Do you think Igor will leave the ringtone on his cell phone, and do you plan on putting it on yours, just in case? Igor never indicated how he felt about Justin Bieber, nor his music, but I'm prone to think that he must now be a believer and just thankful to be alive, baby.
Today's episode takes us to the scenic and beautiful Glacier National Park in northwest Montana, USA. There are towering granite peaks and mountain trails that gain thousands of feet in elevation to hike. The trail system is arguably the best way to see the park up close and personal, but not only people use the park trail system. On August 26, 2005, Johan Otter, an immigrant from Holland, and his daughter Jenna were planning on celebrating Jenna's high school graduation with a trip to Glacier National Park to hike and spend time together. They had loaded up their car and driven up from Escondido, California, and were very excited to spend time in the wild together. The Grinnell Glacier Trailhead starts out from Many Glacier Picnic Area near Swift Current Lake down in the bottom of the valley. The Park Service says that trails are open for hiking during business hours from 9 to 5, but Johan wanted to be the first up the trail, so they left a little earlier, around 7:30 a.m. They were packed and prepared with a can of bear spray. The duo climbed the trail and basked in the fresh air and amazing views for just over 4 miles. As they hiked along, they talked and sang songs for fun so that any animal they encountered would not be surprised. As they rounded a huge boulder in the bend on the trail, Jenna was leading and suddenly stopped, with her hands out as if to say stop. She had a terrified expression on her face. She stated that at that point she was about 5 feet from the bear, and it had nearly a human expression of surprise on its face. Jenna stepped back a few steps and fell, hitting her head and blacking out. As Johan stepped around her to take a look for himself, he could see the worst possible scenario unfolding before his very eyes. The narrow trail was completely obstructed by a 400-pound sow grizzly with 2 small cubs. The mother bear's rage was concentrated on Johan before he could even react. All he focused on was the huge teeth and curved claws powering toward him. The grizzly latches onto Johan's right thigh twice in less than a second. Johan recognizes the desperation of this situation and, believing Jenna had run further down the trail, decides to jump off the cliff to his right into some bushes about 25 feet below, the impact disorienting him momentarily. In the process of the attack on her father, Jenna had come to her senses and grabbed the bear spray which had fallen out of her dad's side pouch of his pack. In the confusion and pressure of the situation, Jenna could not figure out how to remove the safety guard to use the bear spray. She could hear Johan below yelling at her to jump off the cliff, but looked up to see the sow, now advancing toward her. Jenna dropped the bear spray and throws herself off the cliff and loses her senses as she free falls. Bouncing off of rocks and sliding down the cliff face, she loses her shoe and is severely injured. She had missed the ledge that her father landed on and fell about 50 feet, landing on her butt. The bear briefly peers over the cliff toward Johan and immediately runs to a rock shelf that leads her directly to him. This happened so fast that he had no options to react. Johan then drops into a ball and attempts to protect his head and neck just before the bear pounces on top of him. He screamed in pain as the enraged grizzly sank her teeth into his flesh. She clamped her jaws on his backpack and slams him into the ground over and over. He realizes he needs to keep the bear's attention focused on him and pulls the bear off of the cliff about 30 feet in a second fall. As he lands, he feels the impact and stares into the hazel-brown eyes bent on his destruction. The bear claws his head and arm and bites his skull, trying to take out the threat to her cubs. He then feels her huge canines puncture his scalp at the top and the bottom of the back of his head and hears his skull crack and tissues tearing. Then she fixes her jaws at the top of his neck, cracking and popping his neck bones. He rips himself loose once again and hurls himself over another cliff and looks up to see the bear looking at him from above. As the bear disappears from his view, he hears Jenna scream above him. While the bear is mauling her father, Jenna seeks a hiding place in a nearby bush and curls up to give herself cover. After her father jumps off the cliff, the bear slowly ambles over to Jenna, huffing and puffing its disdain. Jenna places her hands on each side of the bear's head, and the sow grips Jenna's head in her mouth and ragdolls her. It then bites her shoulder and tosses her back and forth. At that point, Jenna decides to lay back and play dead. The bear pauses her attack on Jenna and looks around to check on her cubs, then slowly ambles off in their direction. Jenna laid still for what seemed like a long time before hearing Johann yelling her name. She responds, and the father and daughter reconnect in a reassuring affirmation of survival. Johann feels tissue hanging down over his face and proceeds to check on his most important senses. He feels his right eye and can still see out of it. He reaches his hand up to the top of his head and feels his skull without its scalp. He looks at his right arm and can see a large hole and watches his muscles move through it. He improvises a medical dressing for his head from his jacket. He slowly starts to climb up the ledge toward Jenna, but is too traumatized to safely do it. Jenna tried to regain her feet, but unbeknownst to her, she had broken her back in 2 places in the fall. She felt around her head and slipped her fingers into a gaping wound at the base of her skull. She began moaning for help. Exhaustion and shock began to set in on Jenna and her father. Nearby hikers heard the cries for help and quickly approached each of them. Jim and Kathy Knapp were on their honeymoon when they heard the otter's pleas. Jim and Kathy then decided that she should run back down the trail to find help. Kathy had run a fair distance back toward the trailhead before finding a ranger leading a small group of hikers. She conveyed the situation, and a life flight helicopter rescue was en route. The rescuers decided on a short-haul rescue, which involved flying the helicopter close enough to the cliff to drop a gurney to load the patient, then flying them out to medical assistance. This is the riskiest method of rescue. Johann had 26 major wounds, with 60 to 80% of his scalp being removed. He broke the C2 vertebrae in his neck. His right eye orbital was broken. He ran a marathon in under 4 hours, less than 6 months after this attack. Jenna broke a vertebrae in her back and her coccyx. She was also bitten on her head and shoulder. She declined plastic surgery to repair her face because the scars helped her remember her struggle. She completed medical studies at UC Irvine and Columbia University. Johann returned to the Grinnell Trail and completed the hike to help him recover mentally. The bears were not euthanized due to it being a defensive attack. Glacier National Park has 1 to 2 non-fatal bear attacks each year and has recorded only 10 fatal bear attacks since 1967, which includes our previous case on the Going to the Sun Road.
Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us very near a major city in Alaska. On the northern side of Anchorage is the Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, which sprawls 64,000 acres in size and has 150 miles of roads crisscrossing some very unpopulated terrain, unpopulated by humans, that is. This area is mostly muskeg and boreal forest, with stands of fir, spruce, and birch trees reaching skyward. In late spring, you can practically watch the bushes and plants grow right in front of your eyes as they take advantage of nearly 24 hours of sunlight. As soon as the snow melts, everything turns thick, green, and beautiful. The common animals in the area include moose, mountain goats, Dall's sheep, and beavers drifting along in the creeks. The dominant predators in the area include wolves, black bears, and enormous brown bears. It is in this majestic setting that our episode takes place today. On May 10, 2022, 30-year-old Staff Sergeant Seth Michael Plant was out with a few of his fellow soldiers in an isolated stretch north of the main part of the base when a tragedy occurred. The month of May is a dangerous time for brown bear sows and cubs. They are just emerging from winter hibernation and very hungry. The sows are very protective of their little cubs because boars will frequently kill them to make the sow come back into heat for breeding. Mama bears don't have much of a fuse when it comes to their cubs and any threats that might appear. Plant was raised in St. Augustine, Florida, and was the youngest of 3 kids his parents had and their only boy. He had decided he wanted to follow in his uncle's footsteps and serve his country by joining the Army, so he enlisted right out of high school in 2015. His uncle served in Afghanistan, and 10 years later Plant served there as well. He was an Army paratrooper, and for his service he was awarded the Army Commendation Medal, the Army Achievement Medal, the Army Good Conduct Medal, the National Defense Service Medal, and the Afghan Campaign Medal. He was described by his fellow soldiers as always having a smile on his face and bringing energy to everything he was involved in, and today he was doing a training operation with his cohort in a remote stretch in the northern part of the base. As the soldiers were scouting the area for a wilderness training site, Plant and another soldier were standing near each other when an enormous brown blur appeared out of the thick brush. Plant's partner watched as the bear took him down rapidly, clawing and biting him severely. When Plant's partner tried to intervene, the bear slapped him around and clawed him up as well. Then, as fast as she appeared, she disappeared. Plant's crumpled body lay on the ground, bloodied from head to toe in a rapacious attack that lasted only several seconds. His partner helped get Plant back to the Joint Base emergency room. They worked hard to save his life, but Plant succumbed to his wounds shortly after arriving. His partner received treatment for the minor wounds he had and was released. Due to the fact that it happened so fast, Plant's partner couldn't really say what kind of bear it was. The investigative team found brown bear hairs and located a bear den with 2 cubs in it still. They placed game cameras up and recorded the sow returning that night to the den to retrieve her little cubs and leaving the area. The Alaska Fish and Game investigators gathered every bit of information they could find to try to learn as much as possible to increase public safety, but have not located the bear nor its cubs. It is clearly a case of humans walking right into a bear den and had a tragic outcome for the men and possibly the bear too. The U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Division investigated this attack as well, as they are required to do whenever a soldier dies on base. Both base officials and the fish and game investigators came to the conclusion that this was an incident of a protective sow attacking to defend her cubs, but have also indicated that because she was involved in the death of a human, she may be killed upon sight. The military representatives declined to describe the protective equipment the soldiers may or may not have been carrying, which leads me to believe they were not carrying any. This attack happened just 2 miles from the Eagle River city boundaries and a little over 5 miles from Anchorage city boundaries. With brown bears living this close to humans, an incident like this happening again is absolute and only a matter of time. Plant left some very big shoes to fill at the base and with his family. His fellow soldiers stated that his loss would be felt deeply, and his mother, Joy Plant, fought back tears as she said, "He was the life of the party. He's loved by everybody in the community, in his family, in the military." The state of Alaska accounts for only 29% of all fatal bear attacks in the United States, which is surprisingly low given the number of bears there. Statistics say that there is only 1 fatal bear attack in all of Alaska every 3 to 4 years. Compare that to 11 fatal bear attacks over the 50-year history of Glacier National Park. That averages to nearly the same frequency as fatal bear attacks in Alaska, and that is in just 1 park in Montana. These numbers show that people in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming are much more likely to experience fatal bear attacks than people in Alaska. After reviewing the facts of this episode, I am left with a few questions for you. Do you think the soldiers were carrying bear spray, but the attack happened so quickly that they couldn't deploy it? Why weren't they carrying rifles with them? Do you think the military properly trained their soldiers on the risks of confronting a bear while in Alaska? Do you think the sow should be killed after killing a human? I will enjoy reading your comments, so please post them in the comments section below and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.